Either we heal as a team, or we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's gonna make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's gonna win that inch. And I know if I'm gonna have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You gotta look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're gonna see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're gonna see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're gonna do the same for him. That's a team, gentlemen. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Welcome to the show. It is May 29th, 2011, Memorial Day weekend. It is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. And today I have a very special guest. But before I get to my special guest, I want to talk about something really quick. Yesterday, the U.S. Park Police Service decided that dancing in your own little 1-foot area space, very not out of control, very just maybe shaking your hips back and forth a little bit, and hugging your wife and giving your wife a kiss in public is now illegal. And they proceeded to attack a Iraq war veteran, a combat veteran who served for this country. Okay, if you buy into their whole patriotic fervor, and he served for this country. And they were arrested at the Jefferson Memorial for dancing in place. And Adam Kokesh, who's the veteran, was body slammed and attacked, physically assaulted by the police for no reason. He had his hands out, showing that he was no threat. He wasn't talking. He wasn't saying anything. He was just minding his own business. They grabbed him and body slammed him to the ground, physically assaulted him. They arrested people for dancing and hugging and kissing one guy for hugging and kissing his wife. They literally, the one cop walked over, he was hugging his wife, and the cop stuck his hands in between them. This is all in video, by the way. You can see it on YouTube. Stuck his hands in between them and physically pushed them apart. I told them to stop it. Now, these people were really able to control themselves, because if someone did that to me and put their hands on my wife, cop, no cop, I don't care who it was, I would have decked them. You touch my wife, all bets are off. But these people went there, obviously, they knew, these guys went there just to celebrate Memorial Day. Obviously, it was a little flash mob type thing. There was maybe 10 or 15 people total inside. They weren't causing any problems. They weren't running around screaming. They were just very quietly chilling out, maybe dancing in their place. You could see the videos on YouTube, and they were attacked. So welcome to the police state, where a veteran of wars in this country can't even go to a memorial for a president who, if he were alive today and saw what happened in his memorial, would be puking and be pretty pissed. Okay, and I can assure you that whatever founding fathers' bones are left, they're doing 360s in their graves right now, because this country has totally turned into a Nazi police state. So, while you're celebrating your Memorial Day weekend, while you're celebrating how the troops have all died for our freedoms, think again. Freedom died a long time ago as well.
Wow.
So chew on that. Now, getting to my guest, I have with me none other than Steve Stars, a man who doesn't really need an introduction to my audience because I've had him on before. He is just a fountain of information and knowledge about many things, including the Jesuit order, AIDS, health issues, the JFK assassination, 9/11, pretty much everything. All right. He's just a fountain of knowledge and information. And today I'm lucky enough to have him with me. He's going to be on joining me to talk about the Lincoln assassination. And you're going to learn some very interesting things that mainstream history has decided to just ignore. Not that they don't exist and they're made up. It's completely real, and it's all, factual information. They just decide not to tell you. So without wasting any more of the listeners' time, because you guys' time is so precious to me, Steve, say hello and go ahead and tell everybody what you know about the Lincoln assassination.
Well, thanks, Popeye. It's good to be back with all your listeners, and you've always had a really great show. I really appreciate your videos, your interest, your keenness, and of course, on this Memorial Day weekend, I grieve over this kind of stuff myself, because we look back at the suffering and the service that people put into trying to procure our liberties for posterity, and we see what a failure this generation has been by allowing this kind of stuff to happen. But it goes back, and that's what we've been talking about for a long time. We've been looking at historical events. We looked at the Titanic, what really happened there. Of course, the Federal Reserve Act the year after. We've seen what happened with JFK. We've watched lots of videos and talked a lot about 9/11 and the Patriot Act, which really has been, a catalytic in this ongoing suffering of, the human rights issues that we've had in this country for so long, that we've held to very dearly, from all faiths and all people all around the world, openly embracing everyone who holds these truths to be self-evident, that there are certain unalienable rights, meaning that they're not granted as privileges by government. They're to be upheld and emboldened upon our laws and liberties and all matter of jurisdiction in every affair. But it's just going to pieces right now. And as we talk about the Lincoln assassination, we can talk about really what happened at that time, because a lot of people are still confused about this. I hear a lot of information all the time about people saying, well, it really wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights versus federal rights. Well, there's some truth to that, but it's really kind of misguided. I have three words for folks that say those things. I say, well, let's look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates, because this was the debate of the issue in 1858, 2 years before the presidential election, when they were debating for the position of senator from Illinois. Lincoln and Douglas really outlined a lot of the real problems with what was going to happen pertaining to the conflict around the Civil War. And it goes way back. I mean, Henry Clay and people like that wanted to develop a free nation for blacks and former slaves to return to, and that's why the United States actually purchased a country in Africa called Liberia. And there were a lot of people who were trying to resolve the issue. Of course, slavery had become very unpopular in the North, but it was perpetuated, I believe, by the Roman Catholic Church and the very powerful banks of England and people like that who had converged as early as 1820. Popeye, we haven't really talked too much about the War of 1812, because here we keep going back further and further and looking at things, but everybody knows there was a very serious issue at that time, that Andrew Jackson, of course, was a general in that war who fought against the British at the Battle of New Orleans, and later elected president, who hated the central banking cartels of Europe. But one of the problems that they had that actually started that war was the intent to try to take over our financial institutions. And Madison, I believe it was, who vetoed the charter for the second bank of the United States, actually stimulated the war. And of course, Rothschild and all the people who at that time in Europe had eyes on controlling the U.S. economy decided to enact another war against the United States in the War of 1812. Well, it came to an end, shortly thereafter. It was more or less a negotiated situation rather than a real victory. But we know that in 1822, the Rothschilds and the Bank of England converged with the Vatican Bank. And so this was the beginning of really this new world disorder financial system. They had eyes on us.
Oh, Steve, hold that thought. We're going to break. Guys, stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. Welcome back. It is May 29th, 2011. Memorial Day weekend here in the police state USSA, where breathing in the wrong direction can get you tackled and tased by police, and where apparently the Supreme Court says that cops now have the right to just randomly search your home. I mean, hey, let's get rid of, the Fourth Amendment. Let's get rid of laws dating against people breaking into your house, dating back to the Magna Carta. But let's not worry about that. Let's all just go out and get rims and iPods and watch TV and worry about Miley Cyrus and all this other crap. Ugh. People in this country need to wake up. All right. Before we went to break, Steve was getting into some very in-depth information about the Lincoln assassination. So, Steve, go ahead and pick up where you left off.
Okay, Popeye, it's good to be back on your show again talking about this. What we've been showing people a lot about the historical aspects of this is how the Rothschild banking cartel merged with the Vatican Bank in 1822. Now, this came out after the Secret Treaty of Verona, which basically created an alliance of a lot of these European nations against anybody in the Western Hemisphere who would attack one of their subsidiaries, such as Cuba or places like that they owned and ran at that time. And they used a lot of these attempts to try to lure the United States into conflicts with Europe. And after the War of 1812, that all settled into a situation where we were developing our own nation, our commerce, our industry, our manufacturing. Things were starting to catch up very quickly with the all the banks and the major industrial revolution taking place in Europe. And so there was a real intent to try to take over the economy by the Vatican Rothschild bank merger in 1822. And this was what was leading up to the situations in the Civil War. Now, a lot of people say, that slavery wasn't the issue in the Civil War. Well, slavery itself wasn't, because slavery was dead in the South. It was agriculturally becoming outmoded due to the fact that you just couldn't keep slaves employed long enough, planting and harvesting things, any other crops other than, say, cotton or tobacco in South Carolina, which is one of the reasons why South Carolina, seceded actually earlier, many years earlier, and had to be brought back in during the Jackson administration. But getting to the end of all of this is that the question that we raise and we've been talking about is how deeply involved was the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope in our Civil War? And the answer to that is they were very deeply involved. As a matter of fact, there was some discussion between Abraham Lincoln and a priest by the name of Cheniquet, Father Cheniquet, who had run into all kinds of trouble with the Jesuits and people like that, where they discussed the very essence of where this war was. And Lincoln went as far as to say that this is actually a disguised religious war. The Vatican and the Pope, Pius XII at that time, or Pius IX, I'm sorry, at that time, had been very, very instrumental in, issuing all kinds of decrees like papal infallibility and all kinds of nonsense. And there had been the papal states had a revolt and some problems with that resulted after the Civil War, by the way. So it was a very difficult situation for Rome to try to hold on to their holdings at that time all over the world. Because in 1873, Pope Pius XIV had actually disbanded the Jesuits. And so the entire, muscled down CIA papal, Inquisition squad had been supplanted or actually just been disbanded and disempowered by the Pope himself. And if you see these things beginning to happen, you realize that all this turmoil is about to affect the United States. Now, slavery, as we said before, was an institution that was becoming outdated, but the expansion of slavery was very important. Lincoln was a lawyer at that time. Most people know that. He represented Illinois Central. He'd worked for the railroads. And Stephen Douglas, who was a Democrat, very powerful Democrat, because these guys all came right out of the same neighborhood, of course. I mean, at one point, Stephen Douglas had courted Mary Todd, Lincoln's wife, early, but they didn't get along, being both little Napoleons, and she chose to go with Lincoln instead. But I mean, these were like backyard rivals is the point. And Douglas had been involved with the Southern railroads, who wanted to lay tracks out to the west as well. Now, the problem, though, is that these Southern railroads wanted to export slavery into the northern territories. So you had this thing called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Some people are aware of what happened with Missouri, the Missouri Compromise, and how in early 1800s there's been discussion about how much they were going to allow slavery to expand into the new territories to the west as the country was expanding. So this expansion of slavery issue is the very important fact that was happening behind all the Civil War. Now, you've heard a lot of people, including Jesuit economics professor Tom DiLorenzo, who I would openly challenge to a debate on this issue, openly challenge him to a debate. He's a Jesuit professor at Loyola in Maryland College, which is, he teaches economics. He's written a book called The Real Lincoln. After all this time, Popeye, it's funny, but the Jesuits are still trying to kill Lincoln and keep his death and the way it all came about a secret. So it's really an amazing, what you might call just an anthology of our fight against trying to set ourselves free from this foreign banking control system that we now know is the Federal Reserve, and we've talked about how that came about. But remember, back in the 1800s, there wasn't a Federal Reserve. And so there was every attempt to try to get a hold of our economy and to expand this slavery feudal system into the West, because the Catholic Church, the Pope, the Vatican, the Rothschild banking cartel, they made a lot of money out of slavery. And slavery was dying in the South, so they needed to take it somewhere else. And they were looking at places like the mines in the West. Now, here, these railroads had 20 miles of easement that they could get sometimes on the sides of the tracks. I mean, they were given a great amount of land to build a railroad. And the idea was to develop that land. So if you develop a railroad, you can have all this land in many places. It was vast amounts. Sometimes it was only a mile or two. But they could get a large amount of land grant close to these tracks. So Douglas, representing the Southern railroads, and a lot of his interests with the Southern Democrats, and most of them being Roman Catholic, a lot of these people also wanted to expand slavery into the new territories, and that's one of the reasons why they had the Kansas-Nebraska Act and so much trouble in 1854. Now, we talked a little bit about how this all came about, where they were going. Lincoln was working for Illinois Central. You had a lot of northern people who were not slave owners, coming from England, and Puritan and Quakers and people like that. There were a lot of those people who had escaped the slavery system and despised it under Cromwell and Calvinists and people like that. But the northern people did not like the idea of having to compete with southern plantations and rich feudalistic slave owners who owned huge amounts of property and drove people into the ground, processing their own plantation agenda. So this is kind of what they were doing at that time. And as we see this beginning to develop, you can see there was a conflict between this railroad grant land and where the expansion was going to go. And this is one of the reasons why Lincoln and Douglas were already paired off in a fight long before the Lincoln-Douglas debates concerning how these things are going to be handled. But we see this beginning to develop, and this is really what was at the root of what was causing the war. This was, either the feudalistic slave system that had been perpetuated by Spain, and the old order coming out of 1492 through, as you know, if you've watched Showtime's the feature on the Borgias, the famous family that Mario Puzo wrote his book, The Godfather, about, which was the Borgia papacy, the Spanish who controlled the papacy in the early 1500s before Loyola, of course, but how they grappled for power and how they were the ungodliest men you could ever imagine running the Church of Rome. Of course, there have been many of them, but these were especially denoted, I suppose. But anyhow, you see that the slavery system, you see all of what they did to the Native Americans all across, the continent, in places all over the world. And the Jesuits have been expelled, I think, no less than 83 times out of countries all over the world, Popeye. They've just been,
they're very well-hated orders, Steve. I mean, I've never seen anybody get kicked out of as many countries throughout the world as the Jesuits. So, I mean, they obviously it's not because they sell Girl Scout cookies and, they just, irritate people and rub them the wrong way. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be right back. We're going to go pay some bills for about 3 minutes. Stay tuned. Do not leave. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the Lincoln assassination, the Jesuit connection, John Wilkes Booth, John Surratt, and more. Stay tuned. You're listening to Micro 1650 AM, the Orion Talk Radio Network.
No return, nigga, you better believe this. Mary Magdalene giving birth to the children of Jesus. The evolution of the world, bloody and dramatic. Human beings killing monkeys to conquer the planet. The kingdoms of Africa and Mesopotamia. Machine gun your body with depleted uranium.
Welcome back. Today is Memorial Day 2011, May 29th. It is Sunday. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. Go check my website out. I put a lot of work into it. I spend a lot of time on it. Go check it out. It's full of information. It's full of videos. It's full of everything you could possibly want to educate yourself, and it's all for free. So go check it out, federaljack.com. Before the break, Steve was unlocking your minds with some new information about the Lincoln assassination. So, Steve, go ahead and pick up where you left off.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things over the years. They say that history has a tendency to sort itself out as facts are corroborated and sifted, and it does take quite a few years sometimes. And of course, some people say, well, you lose the original firsthand accounts. And yes, that may be true, but also new firsthand accounts emerge. And oftentimes the little bit that's lost isn't as detrimental as the new that is found. And we know that now, after many years have gone by, and the things that were covered up, and we talked about this before, Popeye. Remember, we said that what happened after the Lincoln assassination? Were there people in Washington that actually discerned what took place? Was there somebody like an Edwin Stanton or a Colonel Lafayette Baker, or people like even Seward, who was recovering from his own attempt on his life? People like that who were aware of what was happening and who was behind all this and how far they were getting away with this. I think there was. And we talked a little bit about why they may have stood down just a little bit due to the fact that the country was reeling in just complete agony because of the Civil War. And the only thing people really wanted to do at that point was to try to get back on track. But in many ways, Popeye, I think you said this last time that it may have been a mistake, and I think it was too, not to press in and actually find out what was really going on, because we talked about the conditions that led to the Civil War. The Roman Catholic Church and its expansionism of its own empire under a slavery situation that goes all the way back to Columbus.
If they had just investigated it, Steve, it would have exposed the root of the problem right then and there at the time, which would have been more productive, even if you had pissed off some of the people that lived here, even if some people got upset or whatever, if some people were, even if it flamed a war again for another month or two, it would have been worth it to expose the cancer, the infection, scoop it out, and heal the wound properly, rather than allow that infection to bury itself deep under the skin and then, spread throughout the body, which is the United States of America, and then turn it in, destroy it and create the United States that it is today, the corporate Nazi police state that we live in currently.
Yes, absolutely. And, a lot of people blame Lincoln for the federalization of this country the way it is because of the 14th Amendment. But if Lincoln had been around, I don't think it would have gotten anywhere near where it ended up today with this reincorporation under the 14th Amendment. As a matter of fact, I think he would have brought the entire country back underneath the old Union. We have every indication to believe that from his very last speech on Louisiana, where he talked about putting governors back in control in the states as quickly as possible. In other words, taking federal jurisdiction out and turning that back over to governors. Now, it was going to be a military governor, of course, because they had to at that point, but then they were going to try to bring the military governorship back underneath the constitutional authority of the state, its own state's constitution, and in full recognition back into the Union as quickly as possible. That was Lincoln's plan. And a lot of people thought it was a little too sympathetic to the South, even the radical Republicans who would have disagreed. But, you know, these were the kinds of things, that, as you said before, because we didn't really watch what was happening. We've had a John F. Kennedy assassination, a Bobby Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, John Jr. There's a whole story. I'm sure you've looked into what happened to John F. Kennedy Jr. in his plane.
Oh, dude, that's a show in itself. The John killing. He didn't, you know, the news media played it off like he was an inexperienced pilot. He had over 20 years of experience as a pilot.
Yeah.
Right, somewhere around, he was either right around, it was either, let me rephrase that, it was either right around 20 years or a little bit over 20 years. I have it, I forget the exact detail. I don't want to have somebody later on say, "Oh no, Popeye, it was 18 years and you're off by 2." So you know what I mean? I'll cover my bases. But it was very shady. They found the fuel select switch that feeds fuel to the engine in the off position. And in order to do that, you literally, there's a safety mechanism on it that you got to, like, inside the switch. It's like anything else, you know, it's almost like the safety on a Glock. It's got the safety built into it. So you got to squeeze with your hand and, like, press up this button, and then the handle will move. So you can't accidentally hit it with your arm. You can't, in a panic, maybe grab it and push it. You have to purposefully grab it, squeeze it, and move it. It's made specifically for that reason, and the fuel selector switch was in the off position, which would instantaneously cut off fuel to the engines. And if you were in a dive and you cut off the fuel, there's no way that somebody could try to regain control and pull up on the yoke and pull out of the dive. Your fate is sealed. You're in a dive, that fuel selector switch gets, you know, shut off, you're done. There's an interesting documentary about John's death. So I don't want to digress too much into it, but there is an interesting documentary. You could probably find it on YouTube. The assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr. If you go to federaljack.com and go to the Truth Movie section, you can find it in the Truth Movie section under the JFK section on there, and you will see you know, the documentary about John. Very telling. There's some, you know, other tons of information. I don't want to get too sidetracked on it, but you're correct. John John's death was not a mere plane accident. I mean, come on, Steve. How many of these politicians, children, or people, the guy that wrote the code for the Diebold voting machines, and he came out and testified to Congress and said, "Hey, look, you know," I mean, the video's on YouTube. He sat there and said under oath, "Look, I wrote the code, and if you go in the source code, that's where the backdoor code is for them to switch votes. But it's hidden inside the source code. And the source code is the only thing that Diebold won't allow federal investigators or anybody to look at, because they say proprietary information." And the guy testified to Congress. It's hidden in the source code. If you don't look in the source code, you ain't going to find it. So he's telling you pretty much why they're hiding the source code, and he dies mysteriously in a plane crash. Yeah. Paul Wellstone dies mysteriously in a plane crash. You know what I'm saying? You know, the guy from Ted Stevens, the one in Alaska, dies mysteriously in a plane crash. How come politicians are the only ones that die in these small plane crashes? The news media nowadays, the small plane crashes, they're all over it because they try to sensationalize the fear. How come you don't see these small plane crashes except when there's somebody that their political involvement might upset the status quo? Hasn't anybody ever noticed that? I mean, yeah, there are small plane crashes, but most of the ones that occur involve politicians. Isn't that a little weird?
Yeah, it is. It's very strange. And we see so many of these events, the Deborah Jane Palfrey suicide, after she told everybody she was not going to be committing suicide. All she wanted to do was get her property back and be left alone. But that wasn't enough. See, she had her
Alex
book.
Jones said to her, "Look, you know, do you plan on committing suicide?" And what did she say? "No, and if you find me dead and they say I committed suicide, they killed me." And then 2 weeks later, she's dead.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, you know, when we bring these things up and going back to what happened with Lincoln, it's not because we're sidetracking Popeye. It's because we're showing people that this stuff has been going on for a long time, and we know who's behind it. I mean, this country is no longer at all in control of its own government, the people that is. We have the CIA, the FBI. We have so many of these hijacked law enforcement organizations moving up and down the levels from very small municipalities through states, all the way up to federal offices. And we know that these people are in collusion with each other, and they're doing everything they can to keep us from waking up. So when we talk about the death of Abraham Lincoln going back, we want you to see a pivotal moment when we had the opportunity to set up our own National Treasury Central Bank, not a private central bank. There's a big difference between a private central bank and a national central bank. And this is what Lincoln tried to set up. Now, of course, you listen to Jesuit economic professor Tom DiLorenzo. He keeps talking about the federalization of the central bank. You know, I mean, he's very good. There's actually a word in the English language called Jesuitisms. Jesuitisms is kind of funny. I heard Lou Dobbs on an interview talking to some priest, and this priest, he asked this priest this question. The priest never did answer it. He says, well, I never did expect to get an answer from you because you're a Jesuit. You know, Lou Dobbs said this right on
wow. That's
television.
impressive.
Yeah, it is. I like Lou. I really do. I mean, he's not perfect.
You wonder why he got shots fired at his house.
Oh, yeah, they threw him out as quick as they could because he's another honest to somebody else wanted to be an honest journalist, and this is what they do to people. But even Geraldo Rivera talked about what happened with Deborah Jane Palfrey.
Let us never
and how,
tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Hold that thought there, Steve. We got to go to break. As always, we get interrupted by George Bush.
That attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists.
George, why do you got to interrupt everybody?
Away from the guilty.
Yeah, away from you. That's why you don't want the conspiracy theories. You're afraid that people are going to actually look at you, you dirtbag. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be right back. It's Memorial Day 2011 in the police state we know as the USSA.
The real reason New York lost their towers. Don't sit back or hesitate to react to the impact. Many taking a nap. In fact, they would fake an attack to make way for the Patriot
Act. Welcome back to this last segment of the first hour of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. It is May 29th, 2011, Memorial Day 2011, in the police state known as USSA. Be careful. You don't want to breathe in the wrong direction this weekend, kiddies. You might get beaten and tased for actually, I don't know, expressing your rights that supposedly all these veterans, you know, that got killed in all these wars, they died to protect our rights. Apparently, those rights don't exist anymore because there are bad people in caves that want to get us. So we have to give up all of our rights to be safe from the bad people in the cave. Right. That doesn't work. Giving up your liberty for security never works. Okay? And this isn't the first time a government in history has used fear to take people's freedoms away. This is just repeating it over and over and over again. And this country was a grand, vast experiment of freedom, and it is slowly dying. And it's now picked up a faster pace. So I suggest people wake up and see what's going on, get pissed off, call your representatives, hold them accountable, vote them out, do whatever. If voting doesn't work, form groups, wake people up, do whatever, get a website, you know, do whatever you got to do, educate people. See, that's the most empowering thing you could do. And they want people to violently revolt so that they can pick you up and put you in a FEMA camp, or they can parade you on TV and say that you're a violent extremist and everything else. They want that. That's what they're trying to push for. See, that's what I think this whole thing with giving cops the immunity to just walk into your house is. I think they're setting up the police so that somebody is going to lose it, and they're going to defend their home, which is going to be it's going to be completely justifiable that the person's defending their home. Okay, and they're going to set up these cops that aren't using their brains. Sorry, guys, but you're just not using your brain power, you know. And you know, use a little bit of cognitive thought. You guys are going to walk into someone's house just because you think you can, and you're going to be a Nazi thug, and somebody's not going to take it. I mean, how would you like it if somebody just randomly kicked in the door and started searching through your mother's house or your wife's house or your house? You know, you wouldn't like it. So, and just because you're a police officer doesn't make you above the law, and it doesn't make you a special person or any better than anybody else. You're still a citizen of this country. So you guys need to go look up the Oath Keepers and stop doing things like what you did to Adam Kokesh and the rest of those innocent people at the Jefferson Memorial. And I won't stop talking about it because it pisses me off every time I see the video. And I'm sure that Thomas Jefferson, if he were alive today, would be throwing up at what's going on in this country, and the rest of them would be too. Okay, so I don't want to digress too much. Before we went to break, Steve was getting into the vast Jesuit connection even though I kept interrupting him. He was getting into the vast Jesuit connection to Booth and John Surratt and everybody else, and he was trying to just kind of establish a little bit how much they actually controlled and how much they had their fingers involved in the Civil War itself, not just Lincoln's assassination, hence why they would be involved in killing him, because they looked at him like an enemy. Lincoln tried to, a lot of people don't know, the reason why he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation was he tried to save this country from what he saw was happening. Because you had French troops up in Canada, or excuse me, you had, I think it was the French were in Mexico and the British were in Canada, and they were just waiting for the United States to break up, and they were going to come in and eat the country, what was left of it, okay? And if it weren't for Tsar Nicholas, he sent over the Russian Navy, and they helped us out. Not many people know that. You wonder why the Bolshevik Revolution happened, not too long afterwards. And look who that was funded by, the very same people. Right. He pissed off the Jesuits by doing what he did because he sent the Russian Navy over. Not many people realize this, but the Russians that everybody hates are the very reason that we were able to survive the Civil War as a union, because Tsar Nicholas sent the Russian Navy over to help us. I suggest you guys go look it up, okay? And without digressing too much into it. In fact, if Steve wants to cover it, I'll let him touch it. Go on, Steve.
That's a very good point, because had they not covered San Francisco Bay and the Pacific coast for us at that time, it would have been very difficult for the United States to continue, because there would have been an invasion port coming in from the south and the southwest. We could have easily lost our holdings down in the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans ports and along those lines. So the Russians basically did everything they could actually to help us win the Civil War. And not only that, but there were people, the Labor Party, or actually the House of Commons people in Great Britain, they knew that slavery was wrong. So as you mentioned, the Emancipation Proclamation, it did very little to free slaves. All it did was free slaves in confiscated territories. But what it was a beautiful piece of political engineering, because as you pointed out, Popeye, what it did was it turned the course of public opinion in Europe against what was happening with the slavery institutions expanding in the South in the Civil War. And that was very vital, because it really caused the British to back off, at least formally, from running the blockade. And King Cotton was no longer king in the South anymore, and this really hurt them. But, it's very important to realize that this one priest, Father Cheniquet, who Lincoln had actually represented in a case where the Jesuits tried to defrock him, and he was actually facing hanging with some of these charges that they'd labeled and libeled against him. Actually is what they'd done. This priest had spoke to Lincoln, and from his account, the book is 50 Years in the Church of Rome. Now, I would accuse this priest of using his connections with Abraham Lincoln as, wearing it on his sleeve as a publicity stunt. But he only denotes like 2 or 3 chapters, actually, to his very important and, very, shall we say, celebrated meetings with Abraham Lincoln, because this is where Lincoln really revealed some of the things that he had to say. Let me just read a little bit of what Cheniquet says took place. Now, of course, you have to go by what the priest says here. You have to trust him, or this former priest, actually, who denounced Rome, and he does it very effectively in his book. But what this man Cheniquet had said, many times he repeated, this is what Lincoln had said: this war would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons. Though there were great differences of opinion between the South and the North, the question of slavery, neither Jeff Davis nor any one of the leading men of the Confederacy would have dared to attack the North had they not relied on the promise of the Jesuits under the mask of democracy. The money and arms of the Roman Catholic, even the arms of France, were at their disposal if they would attack us. I pity the priests, the bishops, and the monks of Rome in the United States when the people realize that they are, in a great part, responsible for the tears and the blood shed in this war. He's talking about the Civil War. The latter, more terrible, will the retribution be. I conceal what I know on this subject from the knowledge of this nation. For if the people knew the whole truth, this war would turn into a religious war, and it would more savage and bloody character. It would become merciless as all religious wars are. It would become a war of extermination on both sides. the Protestants of both the North and the South would surely unite to exterminate the priests and the Jesuits if they could hear what Professor Morse, and by the way, that's the professor who developed Morse code, if what Professor Morse had said to me of the plots made in the very city of Rome to destroy this republic. If they could learn how the priests and nuns and monks which daily land on our shores under the pretext of preaching their religion, instructing the people in their schools, taking care of the sick in their hospitals, are nothing else but the emissaries of the Pope, of Napoleon, and of other despots of Europe to undermine our institutions. They alienate the hearts of our people from our Constitution, our laws, destroy our schools, and prepare a reign of anarchy here as they have done in Ireland, Mexico, and Spain, and wherever there are any people who want to be free, etc. So this is one of the quotes that Shenandoah had heard from Lincoln, actually in a private meeting, but it's very true that Shenandoah did meet with Lincoln. Those are all documented. There are several letters, of course, between the two that underline these very precepts. So what you see here is, this is what's happening with the police. Getting back to what we always try to relate to what's going on right now, Popeye, just as you were talking about what was happening. These people are under the perception that they're all almighty authority, should violate every constitutional right, that they have ultimate authority to do whatever they like as authoritarians underneath this code. I don't know where these cops get off, to be honest with you, because I know there's a lot of really good cops out there, so I'm not down. You know that too, Popeye. There's some good people in law enforcement, and all I can say is I apologize to those good cops out there right now that we've let these monsters and these idiots and these people train in Gitmo-style inquisitions, a new inquisition, come into our country and treat us this way and make them look bad and endanger their honest contribution to real civil authority. What do you think of that, Popeye? Does that sound like it's about right on?
Well, I mean, look what they've done. They've gotten their fingers involved in our government, and look what it's become. Our country is, it's like Nazi Germany. And for people that think, the Pope and Hitler didn't get along, I suggest that you guys actually go back and read history instead of reading what you were told in some history book that was written by the Rockefeller Foundation. You should actually go research history a little more to find out just how closely the Vatican worked with the Nazi Party.
Yep, that's right. How was it? We talked about last time, was it 20,000 or 30,000 SS men who escaped via the Jesuit rat lines after World War II? That's how people like Klaus Barbie, people like Mengele, some of these others that got out and eventually went out to perpetuate. Of course, we have Operation Paperclip where we know they were involved, but there were so many other people who got out of this system at the end of World War II underneath Himmler's SS Jesuit organization.
Yeah, the SS, you want to talk about a secret society. All right, guys, we're going to break. This is the end of the first hour. We have another entire hour. And we'll be getting into some interesting, disturbing information about the assassination, how Booth got out of Washington, and more. Stay tuned.
My entire family murdered and tortured, raped and pillaged. I was only 5 and I was the only surviving witness. My entire village burned to the ground. He wore a serpent in his crown. Happily committed murder with a frown. And an army of black hooded fire and skull generals and a sorcerer.
If I back down now, then forever I burn. This is the point from which I can never retreat. Cause if I turn back now, there can never be peace. This is the point from which I will die, succeed, live in the struggle. I know I'm alive when I bleed. From now on, it can never be the same as before. Cause the place that I'm from doesn't exist anymore. This is the point of no return, nigga. You better believe this.
Welcome back. It is May 29th, 2011. Sunday, Memorial Day weekend here in Nazi concentration camp USSA. Before we were interrupted by the hour break, Steve was starting to get into detail about how the Jesuits were connected through John Surratt and Wilkes Booth and everybody else to the Lincoln assassination, and how they had controlled the country pretty much as a whole through the Civil War, how they had kind of fomented the Civil War, and they were one of the very big evil hands that was behind it. And of course, Steve was trying to give everybody enough information to understand who the Jesuit order is, a little bit of background information on them. Although I suggest you don't just take what we say to heart. I suggest you actually go do some research on them, and you'll see some very interesting, disturbing things about the Jesuit order itself and their hands and everything. I mean, Adam Weishaupt was a Jesuit, and he founded the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776. You know, the Illuminati that everybody talks about. Now, you have the Bavarian Illuminati, and there is another section of the Illuminati. They aren't the only ones, but they are the people. The Weishaupt's little group are some of the people that are still in power today. And there's other, I mean, they're all interconnected. If you go back, they all go back to the black nobility families of Europe and Spain and everything else. And I could go into this for hours and hours and hours. Anyway, Steve, go ahead and tell everybody how, you know, the connections of like Surratt and the assassination.
Yeah, you know, we one of the things that you pointed out last time that we did a show similar to this, Popeye, was that look at the picture of John Wilkes Booth with his hand, the hidden hand. In other words, his hand inside his coat.
Yes.
Notice how that also resembles Andrew Johnson, vice president. He also has the hidden hand, as well as, you know, we know who made that famous, Napoleon, right? Of course. This is a symbol and a signal to that organization at that time of the hidden hand. It's not as popular anymore, but you see a lot of these people who are involved with this plot using that as a code word or a code image, you might say, in a lot of their pictures, so people know who these folks really were. Evidently, John Wilkes Booth had been involved with John Surratt, of course, living there at the Surratt boarding house in Washington, D.C. I've actually been by the place and done some studies when I was looking into the Lincoln assassination and some of the Booth escape theories, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's very interesting that this place, that there were actually Jesuit priests who were boarding there. It was a constant rendezvous point. And Cheniquet names them by name. If you want to read his book, you can actually find out who these people were, the very ones who spirited John Surratt out of Washington after the murder. Now, there was a sergeant died during the trial of John Surratt, and we'll talk a little bit about him for a second. This fellow was he was studying to be a priest. This is where he met up with Weichmann and a few of the others. All of these people had influence with the Southern leaders who were involved with Rome. And we talked about a little bit before how Lincoln knew that what was inciting the war in the United States was, in fact, the Rothschild Vatican banking cartel and the Jesuit, you know, order, the Society of Jesus, the Black Pope, and these people wanting to break the nation apart because they hate republics, ladies and gentlemen. They hate free people, and they damn sure don't want you to have your own money. So they want to find a way to make any money that you have issued by their own private central bank. Not central bank, but a private central bank. And this is one of the other areas that most people don't realize, that Lincoln was trying to set us all free. I said all free from this banking cartel. Now, of course, both sides of the banks, as we know how Rothschild worked during the French Revolution, and we're actually after the French Revolution and Napoleon, they back both sides of any conflict because they make money out of the military-industrial complex. That's one of their tactics. Well, they were wanting to finance and fund both sides of this war. Obviously, when the Union needed money, they had to go to the banks or somebody to support them a little bit with some fluent currency at the time, at least so that they could continue to keep the war machinery running and the economy going while they had to fight this war. If you want to know why our economy's bad now, and you can look back to that as well. But the point is simply this, that these international banksters under the Rothschild agencies saw an opportunity. They said, yeah, sure, we'll loan you the money at 35% interest. 35% interest. And Lincoln said, this is absolutely absurd. Well, obviously, they were thinking that if we can't win the war, we'll profit on both sides of it, and we'll take a good portion out of the treasuries and resources of the people while they fight each other. And when the war is over, we'll be the kings, and what's left of them will be our slaves. I mean, that's the way these people think. And we talked about all of that with the Titanic, World War I, World War II. We've gone on down the road with how this all connects. But Lincoln saw a way out of this. He said, look, the Bank of Venice was actually a model. Sure, there was some corruption in it because people are always dipping into the till, Popeye. But for many years, I think it was from about 1690 back to 1140, the Bank of Venice had worked very beautifully as a people's treasury, as a treasury system. As a matter of fact, when they finally took the bank down, they wanted to rob the vaults and pilfer the whole thing, and they found very little money in the bank. And the reason why was because it had been brought back in, loaned out, and been used again by the people. So a central bank is not a bad idea. Lincoln said, if we can set up a treasury system where the people are no longer slaves to the interest, but their interest is going back into their own system, then it's a little bit like a credit union or something like that, where people are actually profiting and gaining from the operation of using this banking system.
Well, you can't have that, Steve. You can't have the general public gain from it. So you have to have some sort of evil. I mean, according to them, they can't have the goyim, go in and say, oh, we can actually educate ourselves. We can build a better country. Look what happened when we actually had freedom in this, and we don't have it anymore. But when we did have freedom in this country, look how much people prospered and how new things were invented. Now we got to wait for China to make something new, or inventors in Japan to make something new. Right. I mean, we don't make anything in this country anymore of value. We don't export anything anymore, and that's why this country is going to hell in a handbasket very quickly. But I didn't mean to jump in on you and interrupt you. Go ahead, Steve.
No, that's really good, because you're exactly right on the point. You're seeing what's happened now. Now we're in trillions, and I don't even remember the amount. I know it was something like 23 trillion on the books, and if you project it out over the years, I mean, the debt in this country is gone way beyond us ever being able to pay back, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's a joke to hear Republicans and Democrats argue on how they're going to cut a little spending here, whether they rob the people on Medicare and Social Security or tax the rich, and that's somehow going to solve the problem. You got to be kidding. That's like saying, you owe $100,000, and if we cut back, the 2 or 3 cents a day that you're paying in on interest, that's going to solve the amount of principal that you owe. Come on, it's never going to do that. So I mean, it's a complete facade. Both of these parties, by the way, are run by the Jesuits today. Look at Nancy Pelosi, graduate from Notre Dame. Okay, Joe Biden, trained by the Jesuits. John Kerry, trained by the Jesuits. I can even show you that Barack Obama's mother was under Jesuit instruction when her father worked for the CIA, and they lived in Lebanon. I mean, you can see where these people are. The CIA is controlled by the Jesuits. It's controlled by this satanic, and of course you did a very good job of putting up that video, and we have to mention that again too, Popeye, that video of all the bones. I mean, this thing is a death cult. This is worse than what I saw with it. Oh
God, those pictures were incredible, and I've had people comment, oh, those are ossuaries, and that was from the black, a lot of that was from the Black Plague, and that was done to venerate the people that died. And I said, really? So taking someone's bones and making a family crest out of them for one of these elite black nobility families, because you can plainly see the family crest right in one of the pictures. And so making this family crest out of human bones, that's okay. That's not evil. That's not twisted and sick. That's venerating the dead. No. Knowing what I know about the Jesuits and the Catholics, they're a death cult. All right, they're obsessed with Satanism. Everything about, and look, for the Catholics that go to church, I know you guys are. I'm not saying you guys are Satanists. What I'm saying is the people in charge of the Catholic Church are Satanists. The Pope walks around with something called the double cross. That's where the term double cross comes from. It's a satanic symbol. It's evil. And he walks around with the little wooden cross he walks around with. It's curved and it's got 2 crosses on it. It's called a double cross. What do you think it's called a double cross for? It's evil. It's satanic.
Yes, it is, and you did a great job with that video. The only criticism I had of it was that the music was too sweet. You know what I mean? To go with the ugly, atrocious, horrible pictures. I mean, I've seen some of these things. You remember, we've seen the pictures of the so-called lambskins made out of human skin that the Germans had, the Nazis had. We'll talk about the Nazis as well. But, I mean, this was way beyond that. The only question I have also is, did they eat all those people? Is that why the bones are so clean? Because I wouldn't put it past these people to be cannibals as well. And we know that that's part of it. But it's ugly. It's atrocious.
Well, yeah, they had the bodies. They had the body of there was an adult body and a child's body, and they've been hanging on the walls with chains for hundreds of years. That's disgusting just in so many ways. And I'm not disgusted because it's not because ew, gross. You know what I mean? It's twisted and evil. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be right back. guys. Today is May 29th, 2011. It is Sunday, Memorial Day weekend for 2011. And today I'm joined by one of my very good friends, fellow filmmaker and investigative journalist, but first and foremost, a friend of mine, Steve Stars. Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Popeye, and the accommodations always for the great work you've done. We just ought to mention our websites. If you want to visit my website, it's called AIDSFraudVideo.com. There's a documentary up there that you can look at for free if you like. It's AIDSFraudVideo.com. I produced a documentary called HIV equals AIDS, Fact or Fraud. And you know the funny thing about this, Popeye? I had no idea that the Jesuits were behind the AIDS fraud when I did it. Believe it or not. It wasn't until people like yourself, I was listening to the radio and somebody said, did you know that Robert Gallo and Anthony Fauci are both members of the Sword of Loyola? I said, well, yeah, but isn't that kind of like, the Knights of Columbus or one of these other organizations? I mean, does that make them evil? And so, I started looking at this. I started realizing that they commandeered the Health and Human Services Secretary, Margaret Heckler, through this whole process of creating a massive cup of Borgia, was AZT. They're exterminating people all over the world with this thing, giving this drug which is designed to destroy DNA to pregnant women in Africa. Designed to destroy DNA. So the side effect, that's what it does. I mean, it's absolutely, and I had no idea. I'd studied the Lincoln assassination for years, been out to Georgetown itself and gotten into the Special Collections Library there to look at some of the documents. The people were very nice to me, as a matter of fact. I liked them. But I had no idea what was going on with all of this. Can you imagine me waking up and realizing I spent 10 or 15 years studying things and all of a sudden finding that I'd never really gotten to the bottom of it and how closely it was related to all this satanic material? That's what happened to me. So visit our website, AIDSFraudVideo.com. You can see the video for free up there if you just want to watch it off of Google. If you want a copy of the DVD, I'm also sending out a free copy of 9/11 Mysteries, which is a great film about 9/11. It's got a lot of great footage in it. 9/11 Mysteries, and I'm going to send out a little this week of the the 29th of May, or this week, the first week in June. If you and also if you hear this in delayed radio broadcasts, which we know we do, I will send out some information on the Lincoln assassination stuff and John Wilkes Booth escape theories and some of this other material on paper for you. So if you go there and you want to help us out financially, just get a copy of the disc at $14.95, includes your shipping. Inside the U.S., it's $3 extra for outside the country, but I'll cram this thing with as much information as I can, friends, because really the issue is I'd rather have you get it in hand than anything else. And if you don't have the money, watch it for free. AIDSFraudVideo.com. I know that sounds like a plug, but I thought I've got to get that in there. And Popeye, you got to tell them about your site too, federaljack.com, and what you got up there right now.
Well, the site is just like an archive of, articles dating back to, I think it's 2007 we have it going back till. And there's videos, there's pictures, there's tons of stuff in there. You could, anything you want to look up, we have a search bar. Just go in there and type in, Jesuits and whatever articles with the tags Jesuit attached to it, and I tag everything accordingly. So anything that's in there pertaining to the Jesuits will pop up. I mean, you click the police state and, every police state article will pop up. And I guarantee you could spend a week on my website and you won't be able to even get through a quarter of what's on there. And it's there for a reason, so people could freely see the information. The reason I aggregate, not only do we write our own articles, but I also aggregate from other sites, is because what happens if those sites get taken out? Then you'll never know the information that was on that website. So we're kind of like we're a news website / archive / video archive, because I have a truth movie section. We have our own version of YouTube, which is called TrueTube. It's got a few bugs, but we're working it out. For a free video service, you can upload, there's no time limit. You can upload videos, and then it gives you, HTML code, which you can then embed on a website or wherever else you want to put it. And it also gives you a link, so if you wanted to, you could actually share the video on, you could just share the video link right on, Facebook or anything else. And like I said, it's got a few bugs, but for a free video hosting service that we don't charge anybody for, and the only thing, we don't censor stuff. The only thing I don't tolerate being uploaded is if you're going to upload stupid crap. Like if you try to upload porn or something stupid like someone riding a bicycle off the roof of a garage, like early YouTube type crap. That's not what it's about. It's for people that have been censored by YouTube, stuff that YouTube will knowingly, put into the memory hole, which has happened to me thousands of times, or people's accounts get closed because they put a video up that YouTube doesn't want out. That kind of stuff is what I want uploaded to TrueTube. And you can access it. Just go to federaljack.com. It says right on the right-hand side, you'll see a bunch of different widgets. One of them says TrueTube. Click on it. Brings you right to the home page. You can sign up. And then once you're signed in or signed up, you can log in and you can upload videos. And if anybody has any problems, with it or whatever, or any questions, contact us through info@federaljack.com, and we will respond to you as quickly as we possibly can.
Excellent. I'm glad you got that out, because I've been on your site and I've seen a lot of things there, and I've really been, like you said, it will take well over a couple of weeks just to even dent it, to get in there. And there's just an enormous amount of volume of archived material. So this is an important thing, friends. We are. This is a great age of communications, but we always face the possibility of losing this wonderful blessing called the internet right now, because we could see this all go down. We look at Cass Sunstein, we look at these people, Rockefeller, J. Rockefeller. So many of these people are very upset by the fact that we are exposing the Jesuit power grid. We're exposing.
Well, look at what J. Rockefeller said. He said perhaps the internet should never have existed.
Yeah. Perhaps J. Rockefeller should have never existed, if you ask me.
Yeah, 10-4.
Car 52. I'll tell you, you were right on, though. You were pointing out these incredible encroachments upon our Bill of Rights. And that's what it's been about all along. Getting back to what Lincoln was saying, he said, he was telling this former priest, Chenique, he said, surely we've had some brave and reliable Roman Catholic officers and soldiers in our armies, but they form an insignificant minority when compared to the Roman Catholic traitors against whom we have to guard ourselves day and night. The fact is that the immense majority of Roman Catholic bishops, priests, and laymen are rebels at heart. And when they cannot be, in fact, with very few exceptions, they are publicly in favor of slavery. I understand now why the patriots of France, who determined to see the colors of liberty floating over their great and beautiful country, were forced to hand or shoot almost all the priests and the monks, the irreconcilable enemies of liberty. So, Lincoln was afraid of what was going to happen if people actually found out what was happening in the Civil War.
And so people understand, because I know I forgot to touch on this after I had said it in the first hour. When I said that Lincoln freed the slaves, and I kind of never finished going where I was going with that because I started talking about the Russian Navy. What I meant was that was done as a political maneuver, because now France and Britain couldn't be seen as getting involved. Oh my
Right.
God, you guys are against people that want to free the slaves. So
Yep.
a lot of people think that he did it, I wanted to free the slaves. And I'm not saying that he maybe would have freed them later on or whatever, but that wasn't done as the grand gesture that you're force-fed today. That was done to save his political rear end and to save I shouldn't say it was, I should rephrase that. It was politically done to save the country's rear end.
Let us never
because
tolerate
now
outrageous
like I said, it would make France
concerning the
and
attacks of
Britain
September the
look really
11th.
bad that they were trying
Malicious
to
lies
help
that
the
attempt to
South
shift the blame
continue
away from the
slavery.
terrorists
Perception
Away from the
is a
guilty.
big key. So it's like my drill instructor said, perception is everything. Doesn't matter if you're really doing it. If I perceive you to be doing it, that's it. All right, guys, we're going to break. We'll be right back. This is Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, and I'm joined by Steve Stars. Stay
The real
tuned.
reason New York lost their towers. Don't sit back or hesitate to react to the impact. Many taking a nap.
Don't forget to
In
check
fact,
out my
they
good
would
friend.
fake an attack to make way for the Patriots.
Welcome back to the show. It is Sunday, May 29th, 2011. Today we're talking about the Lincoln assassination with Steve Stars, and I've gotten off on a tangent here or there, ranting about what happened to poor Adam Kokesh and the rest of those people and the police state that we're going into, but it's all interconnected. before I let Steve get back onto the Lincoln assassination really quick, I think everybody should just Google Dutch to ban foreigners from cannabis cafes. Dutch to ban foreigners from cannabis cafes. That's right, folks. One of the biggest tourism businesses in the Netherlands that literally really supports not only the government itself with tax dollars and stuff and money and revenue, because more people come there, they spend more money at the local shops, therefore people can afford to pay more taxes to the government, okay? And all the local municipalities, they benefit from issuing permits and stuff, and people coming and spending more money in the local city itself. But apparently the Netherlands doesn't care, because they've gotten some a little more conservative. And of course, it's not really conservatism, it's the New World Order putting its evil little henchmen in. And now the Dutch cabinet announced Friday that it's moving ahead with plans to effectively bar foreigners from any of the country's cannabis cafe coffee shops. So if you're a foreigner and you want to go to Amsterdam, you are not allowed. They're pushing to make it so that you can't go into a cannabis cafe, which it's legal to. It's all it is pot, folks. It's not you're shooting up heroin. You're not. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, which I have twice, okay, I've spent almost a total of a month there. It is one of the most crime-free cities you'll ever see. It's very clean. I mean, they have crime, but it's not like any of our major cities. They don't have a homeless problem like we do, because they take care of their people. It's very different. So it's more of a socialist country, yes. And I'm not saying all their laws are perfect, but what I'm saying is when it comes to their laws with marijuana coffee shops, there's no kids running around shooting heroin in the alleyways because of it. Like you hear all these retarded politicians and liars, against it, and all these people that try to say, "Oh, don't legalize marijuana." It's all BS. If anybody's ever been to Amsterdam, they know what I'm talking about. And now they're trying to take away people being able to go to at least Amsterdam if they want to go on vacation and say they want to go there, like Cannabis Cup. That's a huge draw. And people that don't understand, I mean, there are coffee shops. I went there one year and I was talking to one of the owners, and they told me that one of the coffee shops spent over 250,000 euro alone on T-shirts and swag, like stickers and keychains and stuff, just to give away to people that were coming in for the Cannabis Cup. Okay, and now there may be a lot of people don't smoke pot, whatever. That's your personal thing. But why are these people that do, and they're not hurting anybody, they're not hardcore drug addicts? Okay, why are these people being attacked? Why? Why is it so against the rules? Why is it so? Oh, we can't do that. Why is the federal government calling up, governors and telling them do not sign laws that are going to legalize medical marijuana in your state, even though your state, the lawmakers in your state and the voters in your state are the ones that want it? We're the federal government. This is getting out of control. And all this, a lot of this, goes back and stems back to Lincoln's assassination and the 14th Amendment. And like Steve said, and from the research I've seen, and I could be wrong, but I think that Lincoln would have repealed it and gotten rid of it, because he, like Steve, I think you even touched on this, he wasn't trying to give federal authority. He was giving the state authority. He wanted to try to bring it back to where it should be. He acted like a tyrant during the Civil War, suspending habeas corpus and things. And I'm not saying he was perfect, but I do think at the overall grand scheme of things, I think Lincoln was trying to at least fix the Union, because he realized on a grander scale what was really happening. He realized this wasn't about, I want to keep my slaves and I want to be a slave owner or anything. I think he realized it was a grander thing than that. And even if the general public didn't, I think he realized it, knew what was up, and that's why they killed him. Because he did a lot of things Kennedy did. He issued greenbacks. Kennedy had what was called the Kennedy greenback, backed by silver. He was going to tell he was telling the Federal Reserve, he wasn't, and I even shouldn't say he was going to, he told the Federal Reserve to kick rocks. He was breaking up the CIA. He was hitting these people where it hurts. And I'm not saying Kennedy was perfect, but see, he actually believed he was the president and that he could do things to better the country. And when John wouldn't do what he was told, they blew his head off. End of story. And they did the same thing to Lincoln, except Lincoln was more of a pain in the rear end to them. He was kind of more of a thorn in their side. So we're kind of running out of time, Steve. So a lot of people, if you guys want to get the full story, there's a video. It's called, go on Federal Jack Tube 5, or you can see it on my website, federaljack.com. And if you go to my YouTube channel, Federal Jack Tube 5, you'll see it up there. It's special broadcast. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, it's not on mine. You have to go to the Intel Hub's YouTube channel and check out their website too, the intelhub.com. Those guys are really awesome. They bust their butts working, and they're good friends of mine. But go to their YouTube channel, Not For Sale, the number 2, and then NWO, and check them out. You'll see it's a special broadcast with Steve Stars, and it says Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye, special broadcast, Steve Stars on the Lincoln assassination. And Steve gave me about an hour of his time, and we went into a very in-depth, fully detailed video to kind of be a companion to Steve coming on the radio, because we knew that with breaks and everything else, and if there was a topical issue or something that might come up, that we might get a little sidetracked here or there. So if you guys get a chance, go listen to the video or just look it up on YouTube, Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye, special broadcast, Steve Stars on the Titanic. Or excuse me, not on the Titanic. That was another one. You can check that out. It's on the Lincoln assassination. And you will there's a ton of information in there that's kind of like, it's a companion video to this interview. Now, Steve, since we're kind of short on time, we have like this segment and one more left. Get into a little bit about, I know you touched on the Jesuits and a little bit you touched on them, but how, like, you were talking about the movie The Conspirator with Robert Redford, for instance, and you explained how it was somewhat of a decent movie, except for the fact they didn't explain how, John Surratt, who had fled the country and hid out at the Vatican, how was he arrested? They don't explain to you that he hung out and stayed at the Vatican, and that that picture where he's dressed up as the little papal assistant.
Right. Yeah, they didn't go into that much at all, and I wonder whether Redford himself, because I understood there were some problems with the treatment on this. I mean, they were in some real difficulty, and he did a pretty good job of showing you that Mary Surratt was a very devout Catholic woman. What they didn't talk about was that these Jesuit priests had been staying at her boarding house, which was called the Nest of Spies by Andrew Johnson and a few other people, and they didn't really tell you very much about the setting of how it was known, actually, that John Surratt escaped from Washington. Now, he was identified at his own trial. We'll tell you about how he got arrested in just a minute. But he was identified as standing outside the theater, with a stopwatch. And I remember there were two attacks that took place. One was on Bill Seward, William Seward, who was Secretary of State at that time. Most people don't realize it, but Seward got his start in politics in the anti-Freemason Party. He and Lincoln were a lot alike in certain aspects, in that they both realized that there were enclaves of elitists that wanted to take over. So Seward really wasn't a lot of people thought he was pretty much an upscale New York type person, but he was a lot more closely related to people who recognized the difficulties of elitism and the kind of autocrats who can get into power and take over things. Seward there was an attempt on Seward's life that night as well. Now, there was a timekeeper out front who was shouting out times. He was standing out by the president's buggy, and even though he was identified by a Union patrol agent by the name of Sergeant Dye, who noticed him, who said, "This is awful strange, a guy calling out times, standing out in front of the theater." And John Surratt claimed that he wasn't anywhere near the theater. As a matter of fact, he was on his way to New York at that time. But yet we know from Cheniquet and others that there was a whole rat line manipulation of how he had moved from one place to another, all the way up to Montreal, back to Quebec, at various places, underneath the auspices of these Jesuits who were keeping him hidden. They kept him hidden this whole time until they could export him into Rome. Now, in the movie The Conspirator, if you get to go see The Conspirator, you'll see that the whole story is about his mother, who was going to hang on the gallows, because they were using her basically as bait to try to get John Surratt to surrender. And what the priests are saying is, they're telling, what her attorney is telling the priest, "You better get John back here or she's going to swing." And she did.
Which goes to show you how much Surratt really cared about the Jesuit order more than he cared about his own mother. Isn't that interesting? And I suggest everybody go look up the Jesuit Oath. Just go on Google or Bing and type in Jesuit Oath during the break. We'll be right back. Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. Welcome back. This is the final segment of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com, and today I am joined by my good friend Steve Stars, and we've been talking about the Lincoln assassination. And in the final segment here, we have a little bit of time, and Steve and I are going to cram as much information into it as we possibly can. Again, go Google or go on YouTube and look up Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye, special broadcast, Steve Stars on the Lincoln assassination. Look it up. I suggest you watch it. It's a very good, informative video. There's pictures to go along with what Steve and I are discussing in the video, so you could see who and what we're talking about. I show people with the name on the picture, so you can get you can put a face to who we're discussing. And during the break, Steve brought up a good point that in the video we do explain about the connections of a man who was very well known to anybody that's ever researched, in I guess I'll call it the conspiracy realm, and I'm doing air quotes, by a man by the name of Albert Pike. Now, he's a Civil War general, Confederate general. Okay, so there's no reason to honor this man, in Washington, yet they have a statue of him outside of our Department of Justice. And back then, not even a year after Lincoln's death, apparently Pike, a 33rd degree Freemason, member of the Illuminati, a Satanist, the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, this guy is having, and a former Confederate general, and this guy is having dinner and hanging out with President Andrew Johnson, who, became president because of Lincoln's assassination. So, Steve, go ahead into some of the information you have about that.
It's amazing that, this man, Albert Pike, had, formulated the Knights of the Golden Circle. The Freemasons have always tried to divorce their association between him and the KKK, but I think it's a very solid line. I think there's a very close association because everything around it peripherally just lines directly up. I believe he was one of the formulators of the Ku Klux Klan. The guy was a Confederate war criminal, not just a general, not just an evil man in terms of what he did in the rebellion, but he was definitely a war criminal. I mean, there was all kinds of abuses, even among children and stuff like that. And now notice this, Andrew Johnson, on April 22nd, 1866, this is hardly even a year after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, has Andrew Johnson in the White House. And then on June 20th, 1867, Scottish Rite officials conferred upon Johnson he went from the 4th to the 32nd degree Freemasonry, So you can see that there was really a very bad connection between somebody who was highly suspicious. And this man, of course, people can study, and I think a lot of your listeners already know, Popeye, about who Albert Pike was and what he did. But it's hard to believe that this war criminal, Confederate war criminal, is in the White House being entertained by Andrew Johnson. Now, that brings up the whole issue of how closely connected was John Wilkes Booth with Andrew Johnson. There's a couple of good programs out there now. Brad Meltzer did a piece on Decoded recently. They won't talk about it on History Channel. Of course, History Channel is owned by Hearst Communications, famous for yellow journalism, giving you all the peripheral items of conspiracy theories, but never tying the dots together, which is what happens generally with almost everything on History Channel. But this has been out recently, and you'll see Nate Orwell, who I worked with a little bit back, not directly but indirectly as an advisor back when the days when the Unsolved Mysteries pieces came out. So if you go online, if you want to see this part about the John Wilkes Booth escape theories, there's a very good program out on that Unsolved Mysteries did. Robert Stack with Unsolved Mysteries. He hosts that program, and you can see 2 segments on YouTube. Unsolved Mysteries, Booth Escape. Just Google Unsolved Mysteries, Booth Escape Theories, or John Wilkes Booth. It was one of the most popular programs that NBC ever had on this whole issue of Booth escaping. So there's a lot of theories that John Wilkes Booth escaped from Garrett's barn, that he wasn't shot there. Very good reasons logistically, what I would say, would add up to the very, very likely possibility, Popeye, that he did escape. But the real issue of this whole thing is, what was the connection between Andrew Johnson, the vice president, and John Wilkes Booth? And as we said before, you can see both of them with the hidden hand in their photographs. Both of them. There's a very prominent photograph, a portrait of Andrew Johnson with a hidden hand, and John Wilkes Booth as well. Now, Andrew Johnson had known Booth. There was not unlikely that he would have, because they were both fairly prominent Southern people. They actually dated daughters from the same family, albeit, quite a bit of time and distance between the two in age group. But there was, it wasn't uncommon for somebody like, say, John Wilkes Booth to talk to the vice president. It would be like, say, Peter Fonda talking to Al Gore or something like that today. It's not uncommon. But the reality is, they found John Wilkes Booth's calling card in Andrew Johnson's mailbox at the Kirkwood Hotel on the very day of the assassination. And I had the handwriting analyzed, and it says, "Don't wish to disturb you. Are you in?" JWB, John Wilkes Booth, on the back of his portfolio calling card. It is Booth's handwriting. Another interesting thing, Popeye, is in the diary, which is at Ford's Theater, by the way. They're still there. It's missing 18 pages. It was turned over to Stanton, and we don't know whether those 18 pages were deliberately destroyed or whatever. Booth says that God made him the instrument of ridding the nation of this tyrant, Abraham Lincoln. And the wording is so similar to the Jesuit oath again. We see that same kind of a thing, that ideology of being the instrument of the leadership of the papacy, or the Black Pope, who controls the entire world government for some nefarious idea that these guys get sucked into before they realize how deep they are down into the masochistic, psychopathic ideology that Freemasonry leads you into, and the deep, 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 dark realms of the Catholic Church. They're all tied together. So you see that Andrew Johnson is meeting with Albert Pike, but his calling card, or in his mailbox, there's a calling card from John Wilkes Booth, and it says, "Don't wish to disturb you. Are you in?" On the day of the assassination, Mary Lincoln said, "What was that calling card doing in Andrew Johnson's mailbox?" She was a very suspicious woman, but Lincoln even accredited her, saying she's a very keen political, perceptive person, that she knows what's going on, and she knows the motives of a lot of these people, and she'd been right over and over. Lincoln said, "I've even had to learn to rely on her insights, because she's right." Mary Lincoln said that she believed that Johnson had some hand in all of this, meaning Andrew Johnson was part of the plot to kill Lincoln. And so what you're seeing here is, you're seeing after the war was over, just as Lincoln had even told Chennaquay, if they can't win the war, they'll take me out and try to decapitate what we've done and subvert it after the war is over. And that's exactly what they did. That's why the Reconstruction was such a disaster. Johnson did almost everything he could to stop the 14th Amendment as it was written at that time, to allow universal suffrage of all men, or basically people born in the United States, black men included. Remember, women didn't even vote at this time. But until they had rewritten the 14th Amendment, much later, where it was now a new incorporation, 1871, of course, it had all been changed quite a bit. Even though the amendment had gone through, there had been some ratification. It didn't clear the Freeman Act, and some of these other things that Johnson had stood against were really very detrimental to the whole cause. It was a slap in the face of every Union soldier. So you see what happened here is, again, another decapitation of leadership. Andrew Johnson was an inebriate, a goofball, a complete idiot. And the big problem is we've seen this before with LBJ, we've seen this with others. And just to say this in passing, there have been 8 presidents killed or that died in the United States office while in office. And I believe as many as 7 of them have been killed by the same conspiracy, Popeye. I mean, this goes back to Zach Taylor. It goes back to Harrison. They tried to kill Buchanan. They tried to poison Buchanan. I think they actually poisoned 23 people at a very large banquet.
They tried killing Andrew Jackson, too, but luckily a guy came up to him, pulled out 2 pistols, squeezed both triggers, and both pistols misfired. Do you want to talk about divine intervention?
Yeah. Exactly. That's what it's been. And this is what we see. You know, we look at this whole situation. Well, now you have Garfield. Garfield actually summoned Robert Lincoln to come to talk to him. He said, listen, what was going on with your father right before his assassination? Because he knew something was getting ready to happen. He was shot down. Then McKinley. Then Harding. Many people believe Harding was poisoned as well. It's odd that three of these presidents appear to have been poisoned with the notorious cup of Borgia. If you don't know what the cup of Borgia is, look it up. It's the poisonous cup that they've used for many, many centuries to kill a lot of people. They've poisoned so many people, including popes. Pope Clement XIV believed that he had been poisoned after he banned the Jesuits in 1773 because they had caused so much mischief. But as we said before, the Jesuits are like the CIA. As a matter of fact, they are the CIA. Call it Catholics in Action if you want to. Catholics in Action.
Leon
CIA.
Panetta, the head of the CIA, going to be the Secretary of Defense, Jesuit trained.
James Clapper, you look at your spy czar. Look where he's from. James Clapper, Georgetown.
Same thing. Petraeus, same thing.
Yep,
Petraeus is a Jesuit. He's going to run the CIA. But that's just coincidence, Steve. That's just coincidence.
It's horrific. We are controlled by this Inquisition. It's a modern-day Inquisition, Popeye. Welcome to the high-tech Dark Ages. And we, in this last few minutes, get a chance to talk to people. I hope they hear what we're saying. Because, friends, if we don't turn this around and expose this thing and run these people out, I don't care how they go. What do you do with traitors? But the bottom line is we need to identify who they are.
Exactly. We need to identify them, point them out, and then we need to get rid of them and excise them like the big cancerous tumor that they are. Otherwise, the dark ages that happened in the past are going to reoccur, except with a huge technological edge to them. That's what's going on. Guys, it's been a great show. Steve, it's been a great show having you on. I want to thank listeners for listening. Guys, stick around and check out John Preston and check out all the other hosts on the Orion Talk Radio Network, Micro 1650 AM. And have a good Memorial Day.
Happily committed murder with a frown and an army of black hooded fiery skull generals and a sorcerer that can cast spells that